welcome. This is Walt Kirkland. I'm the founding president of Prince George's County, Maryland. I send my greetings. I'm also the co-chair of Healthcare 2.0. I am honored to be here tonight with this esteemed panel. Why are we here? Well, let's just say things have not changed. Dr. Macker and I were talking in the green room earlier. Things have not changed. But I also want to say on behalf of our chairman, Thomas Deutsch, our healthcare and wellness chairman, Dr. Mark Alexander, we want to thank you for your support. Also, in partnership with the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, we thank you for this unbelievable town hall. But today, we want to talk about how we can do this. Behind me, it says how we can do this. How do we get through this? What's the path forward? I was talking to Dr. Carter earlier, and we're trying to figure this out because I don't think, Dr. Macri, I don't think it's over. So we're going to do some introductions, have all you panelists out there do your opening statement. We'll have an interview for like 30 minutes or so. And then you folks online, please, give us your comments and we'll try to ask those questions. And then we'll close this thing out in 1 hour. But I'm honored to be here. I've had several of these COVID town halls the last several months, and I'm really looking forward to it. Now, let me give you some background information before we go right into this. This is going to blow you away. 1 million people have died from this horrible infection. It's changed our lives forever in terms of lifestyle, work, everyday life. Blacks and minorities have died at 3 times the rate. I'll repeat that. It's 3 times the rate as other folks in terms of this crazy COVID infection. It has affected our schools, our jobs, our ability to function in several fronts. Maybe Michael Jackson, Dr. Hall, knew something we didn't know when he was wearing his mask. We have a couple options out there. We have Pfizer and Moderna. We're going to talk about that to ward this thing off. The Omicron variant is still out there. Both contains parts of the original COVID-19 strain. The Omicron strain has grown into a dominant force to be reckoned with. It's been authorized for adults 12 and older, but we're going to talk more about that, how that relates to the fall of 2022 and coming into January of 2023. So why don't we do an introduction so you can see how we really need to have this type of discussion because it's not over. And I was talking to Dr. Hall, mask or no mask. She's the one that coined that phrase because I don't know about you, Dr. Hall. I'm in church and some people have masks on, some don't have it on. So we got to figure out what's what, right? Moving forward. But let me just start with this superstar guy, Mr. Carter. Let me let you know who's in the room here. Dr. Ernest Carter is MD, PhD, became the health officer for Prince George's County Department in December of, I guess, 2019, sir? 2019? Yep, 2019. Serving as an acting officer for the year prior. He has an AB degree in physics from Harvard College and from Harvard Medical School, a doctorate in bioengineering from the University of Pennsylvania. He's been responsible for design and implementation of many of the grants for the Center for Disease Control. Dr. Carter, thank you for being here. We really appreciate you and we respect you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And then we have Dr. Trudy Hall, another great partner in crime, VP of the Medical Affairs, Chief Medical Officer of Untitled Health since July 22nd, July 2022. Prior to this, she was the site executive for University of Maryland Laurel Medical Center, Bowie Health Center here in Maryland, VP Deputy Chief of Medical Office of University of Maryland, 20 years of experience in healthcare roles, private practice, several medical directorships, received her doctorate of medicine from New Jersey Robert Wood Medical School, and she's a phenomenal resource. Thank you, Trudy. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Walt.
You're welcome. And then to my right, Dr. Macri, good partner in crime here, also served in the U.S. Navy for 35 years, that's a couple weeks, as an oncologist, in a variety of academic and executive leadership roles at the National Navy Medical Center in Jacksonville, Florida, Walter Reed Medical Center here in DC, before moving into a real cool job, the Pentagon, to serve as a special assistant to the Chief of the Naval Operation of Diversity. She works at Eagle Force as a senior VP and Chief Medical Officer. She's also authored 3 books and 20 scientific papers. Welcome, Dr. McAree.
Thank you.
All right. And then last but not least, my 100th brother, Ken Alford. He is the Chief Nursing Officer at Poplar Springs Behavioral Health Hospital in Richmond, Virginia, working on his PhD. He's the Vice President of 100 Black Men of Prince George's County, and he volunteers a lot of his time with other organizations. Welcome, Ken Alford. How are you, Ken? Good to see you. All right, so Dr. Carter, what's your opening statement as it relates to where we are? We've had this infection, for about 2 years. What's your opening statement as to where we go from here? Dr. Carter?
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I think that what I would love to impart to your listeners is that we're in a different place than we were in 2019.
Mm-hmm.
Now we have to understand how to live with a virus that is contagious. And this is not going to be the last one we have to. We've been living with the flu.
Yep.
But now this is a new one that, as you said, had a devastating effect when it's first hit, has now mutated a few times, and it's going to continue to mutate. Right now, we're in the 4th major variant, Omicron, and it's got variants. It starts to mutate a little bit, trying to find its way back to infecting us as best it can. So what we have to do is we have to learn how to protect ourselves. Now is the time to understand how to stop a virus from spreading in a population, and what you have to do and what responsibilities you have to do that. And it's not going to go away. It's not going to all of a sudden leave and not stay here. It's going to stay here. And then so we have to react to it. And we have to keep it so that it doesn't affect our seniors and cause them to die or put people in the hospital. We have to mitigate it so that it doesn't ultimately affect our children in an adverse way. So my opening statement is all around being preventive, because I am in public health. This is a really good time to talk about prevention, not only prevention of the virus, but also how to keep ourselves healthy enough so that when a virus does come, it doesn't devastate us, and it doesn't devastate our community, because we have diabetes, heart disease, disproportionately. So my opening statement lives in the fact that it is a new normal. We have to know how to live with the virus.
Yeah, thank you so much. Dr. Hall, what's your comments as it relates to this crazy, crazy virus and where we are now? Opening statement.
So I always like to joke around to start off. So I have to say COVID ain't over, but it is a new normal. It is a new normal. We now don't know who does or doesn't have COVID, because the symptoms can be very mild and people are more asymptomatic. I actually think less people are testing. I really don't know if Ernest agrees with me. I just think people are, sometimes thinking it's a cold or flu or allergies, especially in September. So I think people are less testing. And I think because the variant now doesn't have the level of severity that we saw, the first and second year, where, when I was overseeing the COVID hospital, we were seeing the devastation and the patients who were needing to be on ventilators. Now the symptoms are much lighter. More of our community has become vaccinated, which has allowed less hospitalization as well as milder symptoms. So now is a place of prevention. What do we need to do to prevent ourselves, to protect ourselves, to protect our family, to protect those around us from getting COVID? Now, getting COVID, even if you have mild symptoms, is not mild. You still can spread it to others. You still can spread it to someone who's more vulnerable, who may be sicker. You don't know who's vaccinated, who's not vaccinated nowadays. So you may be able to spread it to someone who's either hasn't been boosted or has not received the vaccine. And the other piece of this too is we're seeing, I want to talk about it sometime, which is this long hauler syndrome, which are people who are now having other medical conditions and other symptoms that are unexplainable because they have been infected with COVID. So if you don't have to get it, that is fine. The reality of it is that know the science still, simple things that you can do to protect yourself, those things will continue. So just because the mandate is up, the mandate is down, can't wear it here, can't wear it there, at the end of the day, we have to use common sense and be able to figure out what we need to do to protect ourselves and our families.
Thank you. Dr. Macri, what's your thoughts? What's your opening statement? And we talked early in the green room. What's your thoughts?
So I think the most important thing that I've gotten out of the pandemic is we have to look back at lessons learned. So early on, otherwise, history will continue to repeat itself, right?
Yeah.
And so one of the things that we learned early is, there's actually about 3 things that I wanted to touch on. So the first thing is that early in the pandemic, the older individuals were felt to be the most vulnerable, right? So there was a rush to protect the elderly and the immunocompromised and those with multiple chronic conditions. And so when the vaccine first came out, we vaccinated all the elderly people.
That's correct.
Or we tried to anyway. But what we really vaccinated was all the elderly people who had access to the vaccine. And those people that were left behind oftentimes were, minorities, Black and Hispanic, as well as, the Asian community who did not speak English.
That's
so
right.
The main thing I think that we saw was a kind of health disparities accentuated rather than getting better. They actually seemed to get worse. And many of the minority communities then had to take it out of hide. And they found the vaccine and delivered it to those people that were being left behind. And, one of the other big things that I think that we didn't have enough, I guess, maybe insight on early on was the lack of transportation. So mass vaccination sites did not work for people who actually did not have, a vehicle. So that was one thing. The second thing is that if you notice, and so I'm a big fan of masks, right? This is my mask. It's a fashion statement, but it's well constructed, right? So I make them myself. Anyway,
Shameless
I'm
plug.
a big, shameless plug. I don't sell them. I just make them. But anyway, I even play soccer in my mask. Why? Because I'm a vaccinator. I'm exposed to unvaccinated or not fully vaccinated people, in every clinic. So why would I expose you to whoever I was exposed to? So, so common sense, just like Dr. Hall said, common sense is probably what's going to save us ultimately. But one of the things that I noticed is that we kept opening up, dropping mandates, right, at inopportune times.
How about that?
Like, okay, we're going to lift these restrictions the day before every 3-day weekend. Every 3-day weekend, we get a surge afterwards. Surprise. But we didn't learn from that. We didn't learn, error. And the biggest inopportune thing is the opening of schools. So you have a population of people that are less well vaccinated than the older people, and now the schools are open and they dropped the mask mandate. Although I do believe that Prince George's County has brought it back.
They did bring it back.
Bringing it back.
Yeah.
So that, I think that's one of the other things. And then the last thing is that these pandemics will continue to thrive if we don't think of ourselves as part of a community. So public health is probably, again, the most important thing. Prevention. I am actually a cancer surgeon, like you said. So I take care of people after all of the bad things have happened and multiplied and been able to, result in a deadly disease in many cases. But I now am focused on everything I can do to prevent those things from happening.
Wow.
Yeah. And so the same thing is true for COVID or other pandemics. If we start thinking of ourselves as part of a community rather than an individual, like my rights, well, my rights do impact the community.
The masses.
And so I would
Yeah.
much rather make a tiny little sacrifice so that I can protect my community.
Very good. All right, Kent, what's your opening statement? Kent's worked up here at the University of Maryland. Now he's down in the Richmond area. What's your thoughts of the current state of affairs as it relates to COVID and the fall, and your opening statement?
Well, I'll say this. If the hospital is a microcosm of the community, we are seeing episodic outbreaks of COVID. Right now, I have a COVID unit in my hospital, about 207 beds. I have about 3 of my patients currently with COVID. The good news is that the symptoms that they present are not as hard as we saw in the beginning of COVID. These patients are coming in with runny nose, cough, congestion, some fever, and a little bit of cold symptoms. That's the good news. But the bad news is that, again, our healthcare workers are also coming down with COVID-19. So we still have to use the common sense approach, as Dr. Hall mentioned, in our practices, because it's still here, and we still have to treat it as an infectious disease.
Wow, thank you. So let's jump right in. Dr. Carter, back to you. Can you explain what literally happens to the body when someone gets infected? I've read and I've heard, that your lungs get clotted and it actually suffocates you. Dr. Carter, what actually happens when someone gets infected?
Well, and again, it depends on what you get infected with. But if we're talking about COVID, then what COVID does is COVID likes to ride on a very, 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 very little small drop. It's not even a droplet. It's just it's a small little molecule, and it just spreads and lingers in the air when somebody who has COVID lets it out from their
Nasal cavity,
from their nasal cavity and their nose, and it spreads, and it'll die out at about 6 feet. But if you're in that 6-foot radius of a person who has COVID, it can get into your nose. And then when it gets there, it starts to get into your nasal lining, where and even going down a little further into your up into your nasal cavities and down into your throat. And then it works its way. It sort of like drills right into your cell, latches to your cell, because it's got a lot of little latches on it. And then it injects its way of living, its self into your cell.
It replicates itself once it replicates itself once it gets into your system?
It gets into your cells, and then it replicates itself, and it replicates a lot of itself so that it can then spread to the cells that are nearby, your cells, and it keeps doing that. So that's its life cycle. It's replicating itself in your nasal cavity, and then it can work as you inhale. It can work its way down into your lungs, where it can do the exact same thing. And when it does that, your body is not too crazy about that. So it mounts an immune response, and that immune response is an inflammatory
reaction.
Yeah. So things get red and tender and weepy. And new cells come in to fight off the virus, and then you get this phlegm, and basically when you get an inflammatory reaction, it's a violent reaction in your body, and tissue around where this reaction is occurring is lost, and all that debris has to be taken up by your body. But at the end of the day, that's all that phlegm and congestion that you're getting. It's because your body is trying to fight off this virus who has invaded your cell, replicated itself, and is constantly doing it. If you don't fight it off fast enough and you're vulnerable, it can get into your lungs and do that and give you pneumonia. It can get in your kidneys. It can get in your heart. So it can latch its way in there and cause you to have some serious problems. And it's not just the virus replicating, but it's your body's response to it.
Response to that.
Right.
And Dr. McAree, I see you nodding your head. So when does someone have to be intubated? How does it get to that far?
Yeah.
I'm curious.
Right. So
intubated means is they put something on your throat to make you breathe, for the listeners out there.
So one thing I just want to emphasize what Dr. Carter said, and that is that the virus itself can't be sitting on a counter replicating itself. it has to use your cells.
To replicate it.
Yes.
I see.
So each of those viral particles will attach to your cell and
Hmm.
make multiple new viruses. And
Viruses.
each of those viruses can go down into your nasal passages,
I see.
your lungs, and replicate. And
Fascinating.
and each one of those can also do the same thing. So it's the viral particle itself doesn't replicate itself on its own. It has to go into
your
your
body.
cell. Yeah.
So while we're
And so that's why it's so dangerous. So
Mhm.
we found out in COVID that, you know, an oxygen level that is low, like in the 92, we used to say 92, oh, that's so low.
Mhm.
And in regular people, that's true. But people were walking around with O2 levels, saturation levels of like in the 80s.
In the 80s.
And so we didn't, you know, we didn't know what to do with that so much, right? So everybody got intubated because they're not
I
supposed to
see.
have that
So,
low level.
so hold that thought. So what
Yeah.
I have here for viewers, and the doctors know what this is actually a pulse
Right.
ox to what Dr. Macker was just
Mhm.
talking about. And what does that measure, doctor?
So that measures the oxygen saturation. It's you stick it on your finger. I think a lot of people have seen it, and then
Right.
it can tell you basically what your.
So the reason why this is important for the viewers out there, it's critical to know your numbers. Dr. Macker and I work with a company called Eagle Force, where what you measure is what you improve. This is a thermometer. So this gives you your temperature set. You need to know where you are.
Mhm.
Dr. Trudy Hall, when is it your temperature out of whack for COVID? Is it like 105, 103?
Could be.
It depends. And the interesting part in the beginning of the pandemic,
Okay.
with the
Mhm.
Delta
Excuse my
variant,
ignorance. Go ahead. Mhm.
yeah, no. What I'm trying to say is in the beginning, the temperature was a bigger indicator of an
Oh, it was.
infection.
Oh,
Yeah, I mean, that's why everybody was measuring everyone's temperature. And then we found out over time with the Omicron, it having other kinds of symptoms, some GI symptoms, some other kind of issues that it wasn't given as much as a temperature. Now you do see some patients who still have a temperature, but it became less predictive of an infection because they were being infected, but not necessarily affecting their temperature. And again, the temperature is your body's way of, Dr. Carter was talking about, of really giving a sign and signal that something is wrong and not being able to cool off the body in which your body temperature actually goes up. So
I see. Now, what about, let's stay with you, Dr. Hall. What about blood pressure? This is a blood cuff device that I take my blood pressure daily. What is this? How does this relate to your general health in COVID? Are there any parallels with blood pressure issues?
Right. So I always talk about having a strong host, and a strong host is the preventative measures that we're talking about: having a healthy body, having a normal blood sugar, having a normal blood pressure, having a normal weight, doing things that can keep you healthy. So, if you do have high blood pressure, how do you keep it under control? How do you monitor it? How do you take your medications? How do you decrease your salt in your diet? How do you get exercise? So one of the things I want to say, my mother used to always say prevention beats cure. So the piece of it, the old Jamaican saying, prevention beats cure. But the reality of it is that, if we actually improve our health, which a lot of us learned during this pandemic, that if you had a healthier host, it was less likely to have issues and problems, but also less likely for you to have, more severe hospitalization. So really, we saw people in their 30s and 40s that had really a lot of comorbidities, diabetes, overweight, high blood pressure, heart problems. They were more likely to actually have some significant effects and possibly be intubated, and we had some that passed away during the pandemic, which was really sad.
Thank you. Again, for viewers out there, we're having this great town hall with these esteemed panelists talking about COVID, where we go from here, mask or no mask. We want to thank the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services for this support. Also, we just want to try to find a way to get through the fall. Let's pivot to another question here. Let's go to you, Kent. do we need to get more boosters and why? Kent?
So we do know that the efficacy of boosters, there are some effectiveness to that, particularly with Omicron. We are finding that boosters are recommended. They augment the body's way to fight this virus, increases the immune system, and it is recommended to do so. And you find that now people are getting these boosters, and it's helping them to have less symptoms of coronavirus.
And Dr. Macri, do these things wear off? I mean, excuse my ignorance. When you get a shot, I mean, like I've had my flu shot last year. Is that what happens?
So yes and no, right? So one of the reasons is because, as has been previously mentioned, you have more than one variant. So we have adapted the last booster, for example, is a bivalent booster. So it covers the original and also the Omicron variants. And there are several other variants that the WHO, World Health Organization, is tracking worldwide. So there are some variants of interest. I don't think there's any of concern right now, but there are variants of interest. So in order to keep up, like the flu shots, I mean, remember, it was probably a decade ago, and I think Dr. Carter, I think Dr. Holt, Dr. Carter, and Kent will all agree or remember this. We all ran in and got our flu shots, right? And then a month later, we all had to go back and get our H1N1 shot.
That's correct.
Right? So because it was a new variant that hadn't been predicted, or it had been a new flu virus that hadn't been predicted, and so wasn't included in the original flu vaccine. So we may see something like that going on. But each vaccine or each booster boosts or enhances the immunity that's from the previous one. And in some cases, it's just general immunity and general health that helps you to fight the infection, right? So, like, you know, I think a lot of people have gotten, a pretty significant proportion of the United States has gotten the first series, the first and the second, 3 weeks or 4 weeks apart, or the individual dose of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. And then we got the booster, and everybody wanted the booster, right? Or not everybody, but it was a rush to get the booster. And then they were like, oh wait, we need another booster. So
That's right.
Then we got another booster, and it was less clear exactly what time frame. And then, for full disclosure, I did get the fifth shot, and I just know that my body does react, right? So I think my immune system is pretty strong.
Wow.
Having now with the fifth one, right? So
Yeah. Dr. Carter, a question for you. Why is it this asymptomatic where you don't have symptoms? I'm confused, Dr. Carter. Why can you have COVID and not know you have COVID?
Because some people's immune system is so good that it fights it off before the COVID can win. But the COVID still is trying. So you got COVID replicating in your nasal passage, but your immune system is doing the job that it.
Does that mean you're healthier, Dr. Carter?
No, it just means your immune system is doing the job it needs to do. So a lot of people who are not necessarily.
Fascinating.
It's just that particular person may have been exposed to COVID earlier and didn't know and had some mild symptoms, didn't know it, and then got exposed again a few months later, but had a little bit of spike in their immune system. It's a lot of scenarios that could go on that could allow this to happen. So you can't predict from a person whether or not they're going to be a carrier of COVID or not without having symptoms. So you have to. That's why it's good to test, especially if you're concerned about going into an environment where people are vulnerable and you don't know whether you have COVID or not. It's really good for you to test yourself before you go into that environment. Like, for instance, if you've got elderly, you got elderly parents or people who are immune compromised, you got to go be around them. Test yourself before you go in there. Yeah, because you don't know if you're carrying it or not.
Wow. Dr. Carter, let me stay with you. What are the long-term effects of COVID? And maybe it relates to how old you are and what I guess what type of COVID you got? Are there any long-term effects to your body?
There are, for the most part, the overwhelming majority of people have no long-term effects from COVID.
Oh, so no long-term.
No,
Okay.
but however, there are some people who
Hmm.
have long-term effects, and those people have what they call long COVID. And I think Trudy wanted to talk a little bit about that because
Long COVID.
it's significant. And when people do have it, they can be in a mental fog for a long time. They can have respiratory symptoms. It's not necessarily age dependent, although I think the average is between 30 and 40 years of age. But old, it doesn't. I haven't seen good studies on it that prove to me that we actually know why this is occurring and why it's occurring to certain people. So Trudy, you might have a little bit more to
Yeah.
add.
Dr. Hall, why don't you add to that? I've never heard that long
Dr.
COVID.
Hall, I'm sorry, Dr. Hall.
Yeah, they had a couple names: long hauler, long COVID.
Long hauler.
Yeah, it's called long. Oh, well, ironically, my name's Hall, but Hauler, hauler, not hauler, Hall.
Oh, gotcha.
And I do see someone in your chat actually asked some questions about it and actually have had some symptoms. So Dr. Carter is right. We're still trying to understand why some members of our community get it and why some do not. There has been one study that came out, Dr. Carter, that is suggesting unvaccinated population may be a little bit more susceptible to these symptoms, but it has been occurring in vaccinated and in unvaccinated populations. One of the things, and I did want, general symptoms, because I think a lot of times people start to wonder, okay, are things in my head? Is something really wrong with me? Because unfortunately, with some of these symptoms, there may not be any test or studies that shows that you have this. It's not like you can take a blood test or a urine test and you know that you have these, that it defines these symptoms. And we also got to be careful because some of these symptoms can, mimic other disease processes. So usually your doctor would want to, rule out everything. And then if everything comes back negative, then it may possibly think that it could be. But general symptoms, and if you speak to most people, the fatigue, some people just do not have that energy level that they've had before. They either wanting to go to bed earlier, or they feel, tired at work, or they just don't have the stamina to do things, maybe like walking and running and other kind of physical activity. Also, some people may continue to have respiratory symptoms. Some people still have a chronic cough. Some people have, chronic nasal congestion. Some people can even have, intermittent chest pain, because there are also some cardiac effects that could happen after having COVID. Neurological symptoms, that brain fog, it's real. People just can't concentrate. Their thinking is cloudy. They may have some, mild memory issues. They may have problems with sleep. They maybe have problems with dizziness. They may have problems with anxiety and depression. And I do want Kent to touch a little bit on that, but also the changes that they have with smell and taste, it could continue for a long time. And you talk
So
to
you
some
lose your
people, they
taste,
said it hasn't gone back.
Dr.
Yeah.
Hall. You lose your taste.
Yeah, in the beginning, we saw it more with the Delta variant, which was the altered taste or loss of taste. We saw it a little less with the Omicron, but there were still some members in the community that had an altered sense of smell and an altered sense of taste. And then any kind of like neurological symptoms they can also have. Also, they can still have GI symptoms. Some have still intermittent diarrhea or stomach pain, and then other joint or kind of muscular symptoms. Which can, again, we want to make sure you rule out other medical conditions that can cause these symptoms. But in some patients, their doctors have not been able to find any really tests that really reflect what is going on at that time. They're kind of being bucketed into, this long hauler syndrome. So I think there's a lot of studies that are being done. CDC just had a research symposium, really with all, internationally just coming together, a lot of, over Europe, China, America, we're doing Canada, other countries are doing a lot of research. So I think they're kind of pulling into some of the research information to try to see can get more information, but it will take us really more time for us to be able to get more information. I think it's also important that we continue to trace, because we continue to trace and get information that would help us to understand this better. And again, over
So
time.
Dr. Hall, when you say trace, where you got the infection, when you say trace, what do you mean?
Well, Dr. Carter is probably the master of tracers, but really, I mean, you kind of need to know, who has it. That's why when we talk about, our actual numbers, I personally think maybe less people are testing, and whether or not our numbers are real. But, if you actually are able to know who you've been in contact with, are there any things that we're seeing that we can make connections? And a lot that's kind of found out in studies when they actually have, people who actually have had these infections and they report things and they engage in studies, we can get more information over time. So some of it is identifying, and through the identification is usually through some level of tracing for those who've had the disease.
Let's pivot over to Kent. This mental piece and suicide and isolation, as you know, Kent, with the 100 Black Men, we mentor Black youth boys from 8 to 18. And I think it's had some psychosomatic effects on them. Kent, what's your thoughts as it relates to COVID and in terms of depression and suicide and isolation?
Well, what we found out, Walt, was that particularly during COVID and post-COVID, our levels of people experiencing anxiety, depression has increased, or has actually tripled. People coming back into the hospital were sicker than they were before. They weren't investing in preventative measures like seeing a therapist or talking to friends, or protective measures. And so at the hospital level, we were buckling at the level of depression, anxiety, and then also suicide attempts, where we had, I won't say we had it under control before COVID, but now we had to change our protocols to adapt to the level of lethality that people are coming in potentially, as well as anxiety and depression. So yeah, it has a debilitating effect on our mental health patients, and we are still trying to kind of recover from what it has been and still in. So yeah, here's where we are.
Wow.
One more thing.
Go ahead,
is,
Dr. Macri. Yes.
Even, we also have noted that there, like Kent said about suicide attempts, but there's also been overdoses. So overdose deaths, as well as increased numbers of
Why is that?
overdoses.
Is it because of the isolation?
It may be isolation, it may be lack of socialization, not being able to see their or associate with their normal peer groups. And or focusing on social media and stuff like that, where people can bully each other and not face any consequences.
And you think about this, panelists, kids not graduating, Kent, virtual graduations, it's phenomenal. I can imagine, Kent, that must just you can't walk with your classmates.
Right.
Right.
And milestones, right?
Yeah.
And milestones in your life,
Traditional
right, Kent?
milestones in your life.
Yeah, it's almost like a form of grief. If you think about losing a loved one, with a funeral or someone that you are close to, people lost their way of life. They lost the ability
their way of life. Yes.
They lost the association with people, which is a critical protective factor against mental illness. So you take that away, particularly from a young child that's in a developmental years, it will have the effects. And just to make one comment about substance abuse, we also have seen increasing number of young people and older people, particularly COVID, non-COVID, with alcohol abuse and also opioid abuse. And the numbers are just outrageous. I mean, we have lost control of it as a community, and we have to find ways to stabilize our community, find other ways to adapt to stress and anxiety.
Dr. Macri?
So, and I completely agree with Ken, we must be reading the same literature. But I did want to mention one more thing about long COVID, because I think that there's been a misconception or a misrepresentation of some of the side effects of the vaccine, and that has to do with myocarditis in young men, right? So that got a lot of press, right? There was a lot of stuff out there about myocarditis in young men. And what was not said was that most of this was not easily, but was able to be cared for. When Tracy was talking, or Dr. Hall was talking about myocarditis with long COVID, that is much more significant, has affected many more people, and is associated with actually congestive, can progress to actual congestive heart failure.
Oh, wow.
And the neurologic effects too of long COVID. There's a recent study that was that's published, and now I completely agree with Dr. Hall that we need more data, and we need disaggregated data. But for now, one
Gotcha.
of the things that has been published has been an increased risk for Alzheimer's
Oh, is that
with
right?
long COVID.
With
yes.
long COVID.
So younger people, more, higher increase. I mean, and again, it's would these people have been susceptible to Alzheimer's in the first place or not? However, there appears to be an association.
Who can take this question? I'm a proponent. I'm a senior Olympian. I train. Kent knows I'm Mr. Superman. How important is vitamin D, turmeric, zinc, building your immune system, vitamin C? Does that have any correlation? Anyone can take this. Does this really help build your immune system? Anyone?
Yes, I'll take it.
Go ahead, Dr. Carter.
I mean,
Dr. Carter cares. I like that hashtag. Go ahead.
No, I mean, zinc, vitamin D, these are very helpful to building your immune system and building your overall, helping you with your overall body's health. And it does help fight against infections, in particular COVID. It's interesting. So turmeric is an anti-inflammatory. I mean, it's antioxidant. It helps. And, does it help the minute you take it? No, it doesn't. It means you have to take it over time. And you have to be sure with vitamin D, when you go in for your primary care visit, in which I encourage people to make sure they go to regular primary care visits, they should measure your level to be sure that you're actually getting enough vitamin.
Well, Dr. Carter, why do African Americans, specifically men, have a deficiency in vitamin D? Is that just a generalization, or is that just something that's hereditary?
I don't know. I will have to defer to Dr. Hall on that. I don't know the answer to that. I haven't done the research.
Dr. Hall, what's your thoughts?
Carter, I thought you would know the answer.
No, I do not know.
Passing the buck.
African American men have more
this
vitamin D. I know they have it, but I don't know why.
Yeah. So there's a whole vitamin D is usually absorbed from the sun, and for some reason, the melanin that African Americans have, that there may be some correlation, but I'm not sure. I know we test it more. I think I don't know. Do we not have more sun exposure? We know those in the community that look lighter than us, they're more likely to go into the sun. So I don't know. So the whole question is, I don't know if it has to do with being African American, but you do absorb vitamin D through your diet and also through the sun, through your skin. So, but definitely we can get back on that.
So
what I do know is that we only recently started measuring it. I mean, it wasn't. I mean, 20 years ago, you didn't measure. You didn't get a vitamin D level. So I mean, it's only recent that it's been looked at. But when people started looking at it, there was a lot of concern about the fact that these levels were low. So anyway, that's as much as I'm going to go into it with the vitamin D, because it's a good question. And I know we've asked that before in conferences that we've been at, and I haven't heard an adequate answer to that yet.
Hey,
Yeah.
But by that same token, vitamin D and any of the supplements should not be used as a replacement for the vaccine. It's not going to make your immune system better than the vaccine.
I see.
First. And secondly, that vitamin D, taking vitamin D and enhancing your immunity with vitamin D is most useful if your vitamin D is low. So if your level's low, then by all means continue to take it. My level was low, I took it, got better, But the other thing about vitamin D is it's a happy hormone. So it's
a happy hormone.
It helps vitamin. It has been associated with good vitamin D with less depression. So
I got a couple friends out there. They need that happy vitamin,
D, right?
Dr. Hall. we have a company called Eagle Force that has this software. Can you talk about MyVax and MimiRx for a minute?
So MimiRx and was developed originally to, and Kent might be interested in this, to work with, it was developed through a grant with NIH actually, to work with people with substance use disorder. Because early on in the when we started using buprenorphine and those types of medications, the issue was compliance, right? Or adherence. Adherence is probably a better term when you're talking about people, right? So how could people adhere better, do better adherence, not only their medication, but also to the support services? Because again, medically assisted therapy has to do with assisting the treatment, not just giving the treatment.
Assisting, yeah.
Right. So it's assisting all of those, what we typically refer to as, as those services that patients often don't have easy access to, whether it's employment or housing, other drugs, other medications, chronic conditions, depression, and that sort of thing. So it was originally developed for that. During the pandemic, we were asked to narrow it down. So MyVax grant, yes. So we went ahead and narrowed it down so that we could look at medications and immunizations, and also track all of those things that we talked about, vital
blood pressure,
signs,
vital signs,
weight, BMI.
On your phone, on your iPad.
Right on your phone or your iPad, right. And you could do doctor visits with it using telehealth. There's a HIPAA compliant Zoom availability.
Nice.
But the other thing is that, I was in the military for, 100 years, my entire adult life. And I was able to put all of my immunizations in it.
I have mine on it too.
Including my 2 COVID vaccines, and then the next 2, and then the next one, all my flu shots.
I have my colonoscopy, my medical, everything's on this.
And you can upload files from your doctor and stuff like that all in one place. So let's say, for example, and this gets back to, I keep talking kind of off line to
we got about 10
Kent,
minutes,
right?
10 minutes.
And that is like, just imagine, you go to a dentist, you get your tooth pulled, they give you some opioids, and then you go to, an orthopedic surgeon, you tore your rotator cuff, they give you opioids. Right. And none of these people talk to each other, and the medical records don't talk to each other. But if you as a patient could take ownership of your data, I think studies have shown that if I enter specific things into my health record, right? My medications, when to take it, what to take, what time, how often, and my phone alerts me if I'm not taking it, if I forgot, right? Then I take ownership of that.
Perfect.
And so I can be a better
because we got 10 minutes. So it's called MyVax in MimiRx, MIMIRX.com. You can download this to your phone. I actually have it. Dr. Macri has it. Thank you, Stanley Campbell, for creating this application at Eagle Force. But let's just pivot to some questions, some Q&A. We have people in the live audience here. We have a doctor in the house here. Rick, do you have any questions as it relates to COVID? You have your mask on, Mr. Bryson?
Always be cautious. Yes.
Come on up right here.
Yeah.
This is Dr. Bryson, right? Bryson? I got it right. Okay. He's a podiatrist.
Yes.
Producer, is he okay right here? Come on in. What's your question?
Yes. One of the things with the issue of masks, I see folks just driving in their car wearing them. And one of the things I think that reflects is either some information they've been given to make them wear it in the car. Some people with the same information do not. So what are your comments related to casual use of?
Yeah, Dr. Hall,
especially when
because you're the one that created this phase, mask or no mask. Dr. Hall, what's your comments on that? The casual, go ahead, usage of masks.
Yeah, so I don't know about you, but I got on the plane and the number of people on the plane without the mask made me feel very nervous. I usually try to get on the plane last. I sit all the way in the back of the plane. I wear my mask. I don't eat or drink. I wait till everybody gets off the plane, and then I get off the plane, and I keep my mask on for the entire time I'm in the airport. So if you think about it, you got to think of common sense, and you got to not care what other people think. I'll be honest. I mean, there's mask shaming going on. You know, do you go somewhere and someone looks at you strange because you're still wearing your mask? Yeah, there's mask shaming going on in our community, and it really shouldn't happen. Really, the reality of it is that we know it works. We know it protects you. If you're in areas where you're going to be exposed, especially with traveling or in a supermarket or, you know, shopping or just
So wear
areas
the
where-
mask. You're saying just wear the mask.
you know, the reality of it is, again, prevention beats cure.
Yeah.
If it's an extra layer of protection, I know it makes me feel better when I wear the mask. And it makes me feel better when I go home to my 93-year-old mother who lives with
Oh,
me
yeah.
that I've worn my mask. So the reality of it is that, you know, even though, you know, in the media and, you know, some elected officials and, you know, the loosening of the mandate, at the end of the day, Dr. Carter and the rest of us on this panel, we know that it works. So if it works, why
Okay.
would we not continue with the solution?
Thank you.
So
This is Gloria. Hi, Gloria.
Hi,
Thank you for coming out.
I have several questions, and I guess my first one would be addressed to Dr. Carter.
Dr. Carter?
I'm a resident here in the county, and I really appreciate all the town hall meetings with the county exec. So I was on all, I got all the information
Nice.
because I'm in that vulnerable community of seniors. My question is contact tracing. I've stopped going to church when the
Ooh,
church reopened because several people in my church were tested positive. And I know about the HIPAA laws, but none of the congregation was informed that those individuals had COVID. So my concern is, what was the purpose of doing contact tracing if you were not going to be informed? And the other thing, a question that I had is about the booster. With a couple of weeks ago, another one was presented. If you didn't have the second or third boosters, is this one, can you take the latest one, or is there a process of having to get the previous one?
all right, let's take the first one. Dr. Carter, you still there? Take that first one about the
Oh,
tracing.
yeah. Oh, absolutely. I'll take the contact tracing one. That's the one you want me to take first? And
Yes, please.
So contact tracing is extremely important when you're trying to mitigate the spread of a virus, especially you remember when it first happened, it was absolutely critical that we did contact tracing in order for us to get a handle on the virus. You wanted to make sure it didn't spread. And what the contact tracing does is just like what you said, you want to be informed whether or not you've been exposed to someone who had the virus so that you know that you won't have, so that you can quarantine, so that you don't spread it and the people who have the virus can isolate. Now, as we've gone on and, you know, and mandates have been relaxed, et cetera, and the reason for that and the contact tracing has been relaxed is because at this point, we've come to, at least the CDC has come to the conclusion that we are not at high levels. We're at what they call low levels of community transmission. And at this time, it takes a lot of resources to do a lot of contact tracing. So they've relaxed how much contact tracing we did. Now, having said that,
Yes.
you want to know it's really good if you know if you've been exposed, and you should inform people if you've been exposed to somebody who's COVID, and you want to tell other people. But now we have to rely on the public doing it without having the official public health contact tracing effort that we had before. So that's the bottom line with contact tracing. But in churches, I recommend that you wear a mask when you go to church. When you go indoors, you should have a mask on, especially if you're going to be indoor in a crowded space and you've got people singing. I just recommend that you wear a mask.
Wear a mask.
On public transportation and on an airplane. And shame or no shame, you should do that.
What about the second part?
The second part is that you should get a booster. And you should get your primary series, your first shots, and then you should go and get you should keep yourself up to date on your boosters. There's going to be another variant's going to come out for sure. You're going to need another booster that's going to come down the pike. It's our new normal. And
This
so
is our new,
we're
I
gonna
like
have
that.
to do that.
It doesn't go away, Dr. Carter?
It doesn't go away, and you're going to have to get boosters.
Okay. We have one more, Pam.
Hi. I'm sorry. I was on the phone and I wasn't able to ask the question. I was
Oh, go
driving
ahead.
and I had
Go ahead,
my-
ma'am.
Okay, so my name is Keisha. I'm a massage therapist. So what would you suggest that I tell my clients who have been exposed recently to COVID? So they've gone through their incubation period or whatever they had to do. What would you, because I'm doing a lot of flushing
Yep.
with the massage, what time length would you recommend for me to tell them that they're able to receive massage again?
Who wants to take that?
If they've been exposed to COVID and they've quarantined themselves for that period of time, that 5-day period, they tested themselves, they're test negative, they can come back and get their massage. They should wear a mask for at least the full 10 days.
Full 10 days?
Yeah, the full 10 days after your exposure, you should wear your mask for a full 10 days. Absolutely. Now, I would recommend wearing a mask anyway, because I believe in mask wearing. So I think that when you have your people come in, you're going to give them a massage, you should have them wearing a mask, and you should wear one too.
So what you're saying, Dr. Carter, is when there's a lot of people, you should just wear your mask.
You should wear your mask. Yeah, indoors.
Close contact.
You should wear a mask, especially if you don't know what their status is.
Okay.
Let me jump in here.
Go ahead, Kent.
Yeah, at the hospital level, all our healthcare workers are still wearing masks, and our patients are wearing masks. And we found that one unit where we didn't have patients really, segregated from the main group, the infection spread. I mean, it was you could predict it. We had started with one patient, and then 2, 3, 4, 5 days later, we had 5 patients exposed. So
quick.
The masks work.
Okay. We have another question, Pam.
Oh, good evening. I don't have a question per se, but I think I had COVID back in 2019, spring of 2019. I've never been that sick ever in my life, and I'm pretty healthy. Never been. Only time I've been hospitalized was for tonsillitis, or appendicitis, but that's about it. I've never been so sick in my life, and people talk about having pets and things like that and being crazy, but if I didn't have my dogs, I would have stayed in the bed. I had to get my dogs out.
You got to go out to walk the dogs.
I had to get my dogs out, and I'm very, very big on nutraceuticals. I take all my nutraceuticals in isotonic form.
Okay.
So I tripled up on my vitamin D3. I tripled up on my super antioxidants.
Nice.
Oligomericyanidins. I tripled up on my vitamin C.
Okay.
My vitamin E. And even when my chest was just burning, I still did my push-ups. I still did my calisthenics.
Outstanding.
And I ran, and I had that cough for about 5 or 6 weeks. It was terrible. I did take off.
Did you ever get diagnosed? Did you ever get it checked out?
No,
Yeah.
I just burned it off.
Okay.
And when we start seeing things about
Mhm.
in 2020
Okay.
about this coronavirus, I said I must have had it.
Okay.
And there were 2 other people that at work, they had the same symptoms that, but they didn't, one did work out like I did, the other one she didn't, but it was tough. It felt like I was getting kicked in my chest, but I just do thank God that I had my nutraceuticals to really help me get through it, because I did feel a humongous difference.
Wow.
After. And then, so now even I'm in the public all the time. I work at a dealership, so I keep a personal air purifier disinfectant on me
right on you.
at all times.
Here we go.
I keep one in my office.
Okay.
I have my clients to wear their masks. I make sure I'm boosted up. Got
Okay.
my vaccination, got my booster. My mom got hers.
Great.
My whole family pretty much has got
All right.
it. So
Okay.
we have to keep spreading the word that we have to get vaccinated. We have to get boosted,
I agree.
especially our community.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Pam.
And Pam, you bring up a really, really good point, and that is, the first thing that we can do to prevent disease, any disease, right, is to eat healthier, make sure that our levels are normal, our numbers are good, and that we maintain our level of physical activity. Because all these things include, and plus mindfulness, right? So if we take a little bit of time for ourselves, 5 minutes a day, do a little self-meditation, that, our sleep is better, our eating is better, our physical activity is better. The point that you made about being generally healthy is, and I'm not talking about the new normal healthy. I'm talking about, healthy.
Yeah, so
So,
thank you very much. We're going
thank
to
you,
close
Pam.
this out. We're in the top of the hour. It's been a very fast hour, and I want to thank our panelists for your time today. In the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, we appreciate you. We thank you for your commitment to COVID. And, this is not over, Kent. This is not over, Dr. Hall. We have a ways to go, and we try to have some good dialogue. So why don't we close this out? Dr. Macri, what are your final comments as we close this out?
So Pam kind of inspired me to make my final comments about people being generally healthy. But one of the things we did find is that obesity is one of the risk factors for worse disease. And it makes sense because it is an inflammatory disease that's very, very complex.
So the obesity, what does that do? Does that clot? Does that cause high pressure?
It causes inflammation.
Inflammation. So it
So,
increases the inflammation
yeah,
piece.
It can affect your blood pressure. It can affect your bowel activity. It can affect your sleep. There's a lot of the breathing. It's a lot of the things that are associated. In fact, one of the things that we see with obesity is sleep apnea. And
Yes.
many people who don't really realize that they have obstructed or disturbed sleep patterns due to that. So I think that a little tiny bit of exercise more than what you do now
I concur.
is healthy. I mean, no one's going to go out. I mean, I used to run 8-minute miles, and I don't think I could do one today, but but the point is that if we just do a little bit more exercise and we just exercise a little bit more discipline in portion control. So the USDA has a what they call the plate method, right? And so
Portion
that
control.
plate is a 9-inch plate. And I think most people's dinner plates are 12-inch plates.
All right.
And so
Well,
we just have to be careful of what we put on our plate and exercise just a teeny bit more.
okay.
And you can, over the course of a year, you can, you'll see.
And
that
your
the-
take is mask or no mask?
Oh, my take is mask all the time.
All the time.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And so I am one of those people that maybe you may see it wearing a mask in the car, but I anticipate, like, I'm in the military, so I go to
Okay.
the any of the military bases. Andrews is right here.
Okay.
I may go to a military base, so I put my mask on in anticipation of showing my ID at the gate.
All right. Well, thank
Rolling
you.
down my window.
Thank you, Dr.
So-
Macker. We appreciate what you do with Eagle Force and your knowledge in the community, and you do so much from a volunteer perspective. So thank you for being on this show. We really value your opinion. Dr. Carter, your final comments, man. We really appreciate you, sir. Worked with you a couple years, and you have so much wealth of information. What's your final comments?
Well, I agree with Dr. McAree. I mean, I think prevention is where you should be. I mean, exercise, even a little, just do more exercise than you're doing now. A little more, that's fine. Sleep. Also want to just point out, and I know Kent will get to this, stress is really a really bad actor in making your body inflamed. And so we've really got to work on our stress level.
Dr. Carter, does stress confuse the body, Dr. Carter? Does it
Well,
confuse the body?
it doesn't confuse the body because the body is very intelligent. But it's thinking that you're in a situation where you've got to run and you're scared, and so it's doing what it has to do.
It's
But
all
those
over the
high
map.
cortisol levels that you produce doesn't do your body a bit of good when you're trying to stay healthy and be calm where you should be. So I can't stress enough. I can't emphasize enough. Let me leave the word stress out of it. That you have to really get to a state where you take care of yourself first. That includes, and I'm weighing in, wearing a mask to protect yourself and your loved ones. So with that, those are my closing remarks. I really, really don't want us to live in a community where we are overstressed to the point where we're getting into the point where our mental illness and our mental states are affected. So
I hear you. Thank you.
that's where I'm going to leave it.
Thank you. And let's go to Kent. What's your final comment, sir?
Yes, I'm going to say, as we take care of our physical health, be mindful to take care of your mental health. 20 minutes a day, if you can meditate, just no technology, phones off, just take yourself to a quiet place, use positive imagery, think about your goals for that day, and just take yourself to a good place so that you can deal with the day-to-day stressors. And then, yes, wear a mask, get your flu vaccines also, not just the COVID vaccine, but flu as well.
Flu
and
also.
then, of course, take care of you and your body will take care of you.
Thank you. Let's close it out with Dr. Hall. Dr. Hall, your final comments. And thank you, Kent, for your participation. Dr. Hall?
Okay, prevention beats cure. COVID ain't over.
COVID ain't over.
This pandemic was a wake-up call to the minority community. It just reminded us of our health disparities and our health inequities, and also the need for us to have a better baseline of wellness. I'm going to echo, everything that my colleagues have said. We have to get to a healthier state, not just for COVID, but just for really where we want to be. And also, this is not going to be the first virus. We have to make sure that we're a better place. So I'm going to say I have a blue mask, a pink mask, orange mask, and this one's
so make it a fashion statement. I got you.
I'm saying make it a fashion statement, wear your different colors. And I do want one thing. I've been using this. This is a plastic cage. You can get it from Amazon, pack of 10. I wear this underneath my mask. And for those of you who say the mask is, problems with your face, or because we've been wearing masks now for a long time, or bothers your skin, or you feel you can't breathe, for the massage therapist, actually wear this. I wear this when I'm in the hospital. And this allows me to keep my mask on for hours, especially when I travel on the plane.
And you don't get that imprint. You don't get the imprint.
You don't get the imprint, and then it also feels comfortable. So again, Amazon, a pack of 10. This may make the mask a little bit more tolerable, but I mean, this is for the long haul, no pun intended. And again, if you need to, get your multicolored mask so that you can be fashionable as you now continue to fight the pandemic.
All right. Well, we went 5 minutes over, but it's worth it. Sometimes we rush through life, Dr. Mack. We can't rush through life all the time. So I want to thank all the people in the studio. Thank you, esteemed panelists. We appreciate you. On behalf of the 100 Black Men of America, this is Walt Kirkland, and we really appreciate this discussion. It ain't over, and we can do this behind me, but we got to do our due diligence day in and day out. Take your vitamins, work out. As you know, Dr. Macri, I'm a senior Olympian. I train. I still run like a maniac in my 60s because you know what? I got to keep moving. So work out, measure your, know your temperature, your blood pressure. You got to know this stuff anyway. And clinically, it's proven, Dr. Macri, if you exercise, it slows down the aging process. You sleep better, right, Dr. Hall? It actually slows down the cancer rate. So there's a lot of good things about working out and taking care of yourself. And just mask up if there's a lot of people. So we're going to close this out. This is Walt Kirkland. Bye for now. And I want to say thank you all. You have a good evening.